Hello everyone, so top 5 melee weapons inside of Warframe, prime weapons, normal weapons, maybe a little bit of surprise weapons that you didn't expect. We're gonna be covering that in today's video. I'm your lovely host, the Gaming Weasel, and of course, let's get right into the setup of the build. So, of course, the Warframe of choice, Nezha Prime. Fire with his first and second ability, armor reduction, very good. Instead of his fourth ability, I do have Roar with an 80% damage increase, which is gonna be pretty good and is gonna be used throughout the gameplay. I do have Molt augmented in Arcane Fury, as you can see on the screen. Arcane Fury increasing my damage by 180% for my melee weapons, which of course, if you're gonna play with melee weapons primarily, increasing their damage is always beneficial. Bigger numbers, bigger damage, of course. For the focus school, we have Nermon. We do have, of course, primarily for power spike, so my combo counter depletes instead of decays completely. So that is very cool. I do use Void Levitation sometimes, lifting the enemies up, which of course is always amazing and making them susceptible to more damage, even though I can't say the word. The primer of choice is going to be the Epitaph. The build is right there, Corrosive and Blast. A pretty simple plain and build. If you don't want to use the Epitaph, the Kuvanu, Corsido, and the Bubonico are amazing weapons as well for primers. As I said, I'm going to be using Nezha throughout the gameplay. Zaws are not included in the video because Zaws are amazing weapon in and of itself. They don't really need to be like in a top 5 list. They're amazing pretty much all throughout. They're worthy of a top 5 and even maybe above that, so keep that in mind. Number 5 is not worse than number 1, number 3 is not better than number 4. These are my top 5 picks that I use that I think are definitely worthy of a top 5, I guess, picks video. They're amazing inside of Steelpunk with the right setup, with mine or either your own, using different Warframes and then, you know, primers and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. Honorable mentions are also amazing weapons inside of Warframe, and they are truly worthy of the top 5 spots as well. It's just, you know, I can't make a top 50 melee weapons for Warframe because then I'm going to be covering basically almost every single melee weapon. So basically that is it. I'm pretty sure I didn't miss anything, but if I did, maybe leave it in the comment section below, or I'll leave it, you know, somewhere on the screen right there. Now let's get into the top 5. The first weapon on the list is my most used melee weapon, and I do love this melee weapon. Ever since I got it, I haven't stopped using it. Well, of course I have a little bit, but nonetheless, Cronin Prime is the weapon. A Master Rank 13 Tonfas weapon, primarily doing slash damage with a crit chance of 22%, a multiplier of 2 times, and a status chance of 34%. Honestly, the only bad side of this weapon is the Riven Disposition, which, you know, in gameplay, it has no effect at all. You're not gonna see any bad sides of this weapon. One thing that I forgot to mention, there's no Rivens in these builds. I don't use Rivens. I don't honestly think that you're gonna need them either, but if you do have a Riven for one of these melee weapons, you know, put it on, use it. The build is of course going to be using the Sovereign Outcast stance, focusing on, of course, damage and also having a little bit of range with Primed Reach. The attack speed on this weapon is amazing with Prime Fury. Honestly, as you can see, you're going to be slashing like a madman. Heavy attacks are going to be decent as well. You're going to be killing everything, just switching from your primer to your Cronin Prime, and then a little bit of that, you're basically just gonna be wiping the floor with enemies. Of course, if you don't love using Condition Overload and if you don't love using primers, you will be able to use primed point blank, prime pressure point, sorry. You will have a slight damage decrease, but honestly, at around level 100 and to 150, that won't be that noticeable. A little bit later on, it might be a little bit, but at that point, for example, switching out out, let's say, Weeping Wounds for Bane mod would be pretty decent as well, because Bane mods are going to be helping out at much higher level Steel Path missions than some other mods. But as I said, the build is plain and simple. I think everybody can make this build. Sadly, the weapon itself, it is vaulted as the time I'm recording this video, the best that I know, so that's a little bit tricky, but nonetheless, it is an amazing weapon. Slashing, dashing, the range is also really good, because if you hold down right click once you're pressing E like a madman, you can actually throw the tonfas in front of you and do damage in that aspect as well. The range, I'm not sure, I think it's around 3 meters, it seems like. I was searching the wiki everywhere, so I can't really seem to find it, but I'm guessing that is sort of the range of the actual, I guess, you know, throwing thing. But the Cronin Prime, this weapon has been amazing for the longest time. They have been nerfing the Riven disposition for the longest time as well, but it doesn't seem to be making a change. Plus, I don't think that a lot of people actually use a Riven on this weapon. It is definitely not needed. This weapon has amazing stats in and of itself. A base, as I said, the 169 slash, which is really decent, and a total damage, of course, of 212. This weapon just does bits. It destroys everything. It can destroy acolytes as well. Just, you know, keep in mind that you have a tanky Warframe, because you're going to be kissing that acolyte a lot of the time with melee weapons. But this was the Cronin Prime, our number 5 weapon. We're going to be moving on to number 4. At number 4, we have the Dual Keris Prime, a Mastery Rank 14 dual swords weapon with the second highest attack speed behind the Name Skyla Prime. A primary slash weapon with crit chance of 32%, which is incredible. Crit multiplier of 2.6 and a status chance of 24%. This weapon shreds through enemies, and I do mean in the literal sense of the word, shreds through enemies. The high attack speed is very, very beneficial. It is incredibly good. It's incredibly good against killing hordes of enemies, just because if you have a great primer, which, you know, I told you which ones are good primers, this weapon is just slashing, dashing, and killing enemies. If you were to pick up a Warframe such as a Gauss or Wisp, with, of course, Wisp's, you know, speed mode, you're going to be just incredibly fast. Or even Warcry could be pretty decent. If you want a fully kitted out ninja, you know, put Warcry instead of his fourth ability, and then this weapon is basically going to be incredibly fast. The build, of course, a Swirling Tiger. We have primarily, you know, utilizing a little bit of range as well. The range is okay on this weapon, but prime reach is definitely a must, at least in my opinion. Of course, Condition Overload, Broad Rush, that is a definite must. As I said, if you do not like using Condition Overload, Pressure Point is incredibly good. You will have slightly less damage. Now, this weapon, again, against Acolytes is actually really, really good. Of course, priming the Acolyte and stopping it with your Operator Arcane, which I forgot what it's called. It's up on the screen. This Arcane makes it much easier to kill enemies with melee weapons, considering you're right inside of their face. So, you know, you're trying not to die, and stopping them is going to be much easier to, of course, apply those slash procs and also just tear through that Acolyte. Now, are there any downsides of the weapon? The downside is only the range, in my opinion, even though it's not that big of a downside. Other than that, there is no downside. One way you could actually mod this weapon is with the Gladiator set. With the Gladiator set, instead of viral, of course, and also range, what you can do, or Weeping Runes, depends on which one you want to change out, this weapon is going to constantly red crit because of the Gladiator bonus set. Honestly, just red crits all over the screen. Have I noticed a big drop off in damage? Well, considering I have a Panzerable Profiler with Viral Quills, I haven't noticed it that much, but there will be a small damage drop off because, of course, Viral Quills will apply viral, but, you know, the chances of it applying it to the enemy that you're attacking is not as high as, of course, having guaranteed viral on your weapon itself. Nonetheless, even without that, either one of the two builds that you choose, this weapon is going to be incredible for Steel Path and an amazing melee weapon to have just equipped on your Warframe for fast slashing and dashing. Now, moving on to number 3. And at number 3, we have, of course, the Nikana Prime, a Mash Rank 12 Nikana weapon with the highest critical chance and critical multiplier of all Nikana, also the second highest status chance of all Nikanas behind the Dusky and Jati. It is primarily a slash weapon with 28% critical chance, which is very good, crit multiplier 2.4 and a status chance of 28. Now, this weapon is incredibly good. If you want to feel like a true samurai in Warframe, this is the weapon of choice. This weapon will allow you to have great mobility with its, of course, I guess you could call it slashing and the dashing stance. Is of course the build Blinding Justice. We have Condition Overload, of course, Blood Rush. Pretty plain and simple. Here we have Northwind and Prime Fever Strike. We also have Gladiator Might. This is going to be kind of important, and I'll explain why in just a second. And basically, other than that, Weeping Runes, Primed Fury, Organ Shatter. Now, a couple of things that I want you to know about this build. This build for me is sort of made for basically utilizing almost every single combo that you possibly can out of Blind Justice, with holding your right mouse button by default, of course, and then pressing E, you're going to be doing a forward slashing motion, moving you forward. With just pressing E, you're going to be doing fast slashing strikes. And when there's an enemy that you may be finding a little bit more difficult to kill, Acolytes, Captain Warren, at least avoids case, and or maybe some really heavy duty corrupted heavy gunner, that's maybe an Eximus, right clicking or holding down your middle mouse button actually, doing the heavy attack is going to be able to eliminate it basically instantly. The heavy attack on this weapon is actually very, very good. A base damage of 990. This is like the only weapon that I'm going to be mentioning this, because this is sort of the only weapon where I'm usually utilizing the heavy attack, except one more weapon, but we'll get to there. So 990 base damage is pretty good. So honestly, with Gladiator Might, it is going to be very, very useful. That's why I honestly prefer it, even if I had a Bane mod, just because this weapon is, in my case, made for doing everything. Every combo that you possibly can, just bring it out of Blind Justice and everything will die. I mean, every single enemy will die in front of these melee weapons. These melee weapons are actually really, really good and really, really useful. The Nikana is actually, it's just a weapon that I love, that looks cool, that feels cool to use, and makes me feel like a real life samurai. And honestly, the damage is quite incredible. The heavy attacks, as I said, for tougher enemies, just normal slashing for basic trash enemies. Basic slash attacks can also kill Eximus pretty easily without any issues. Shields are never a problem with any of these melee weapons, and not even with the Nikana. So basically, this weapon is just really, really good. And it could be a one-shot Acolyte killer, depending, of course, on some circumstances as well. But other than that, this weapon is very incredible. Of course, as I said, Wisp, the Gauss are my two other options just for faster attacks, but with Prime Fury, I honestly don't need it as much. Nonetheless, the Nikana Prime, an amazing Nikana weapon. Moving on to number 2. At number 3, we have a weapon that I've been enjoying recently a lot. It is the Nefaria, or Dual Daggers melee weapon, a Mastery Rank 13 weapon that can be gained by doing an armor bounties. It has primarily heat / following closely by. We have a crit chance of 21%, crit multiplier of 2.3, and a status chance of 33%. Now, doing the normal standing combo without basically pressing and holding anything, just pressing E, will do one slash attack that does a 200% damage, and then doing a second slash attack that also deals another 200% damage, and then firing 4 fireballs that deal 50% of the base weapon's damage. Now, these fireballs is what makes it quite interesting. Of course, fire, reduces the armor. It has infinite punch through against bodies. The fireballs travel 19 meters. Keep in mind that shattering impact does not work with the fireballs. It does have a guaranteed impact proc, and that's why I'm saying that. And sadly, the projectile speed is not affected by attack speed. Now, I personally sort of 50-50 utilize these fireballs. Now, if you want, you can just basically do normal attacks all the way and just fire everything up. That is very, very possible. I basically use it as just a normal dual daggers weapon. On occasion, I do use the fireballs itself because they do actually help out a lot with the DPS. Of course, the new, as I said, 200% on the first and second attack is always quite amazing. The build using spinning needle, of course, condition overload, the blood rush, that is very, very important. Viral, reach, also primed fury, organ shatter, weeping wounds, pretty plain and simple build, a 3-forma build as well. This weapon is quite a surprise. I've been using it for the past like 2 or 3 days, and of course I did play when it did came out, but I'm surprised by how good this weapon actually is. I'm very, very fond of it. It is very, very cool. The attacks look amazing. The weapon itself does really, really good damage. I did actually before, like I double checked if shattering impact works, so sadly it doesn't. I did before have a build with it, but sadly it does not work with this, even though it would be very, very good if it actually did work because of the forced impact procs. But nonetheless, even without that, the weapon is quite amazing. Mods can be changed out as well. If you do want to, you could change out Virulent Scourge for a Bane mod and Vicious Frost for example, Molten Impact for extra fire damage. That could be very useful as well. The attacks are pretty fast, they have a decent range. You don't really have to worry about, I guess, any sort of enemies being far away from you or anything, because of course with Primed Reach it makes it much easier. But do keep in mind, if you don't have primed reach, then put on normal reach, it's going to be almost the same, but a little bit shorter. Nonetheless, this is an amazing weapon, but I was sort of on the edge between this and the Verdalac, which is another weapon from the Archons, but I do prefer the Neferi much more useful, and can be utilized pretty amazingly with Ash Prime, even though I sadly didn't in this video, but there's a video on YouTube somewhere from some other Warframe YouTuber about the great combinations between Neferi and Ash Prime. Nonetheless, the Neferi, an amazing dual dagger weapon, and we're gonna be moving on to number 2. Of course, we do have the honorable mentions. I forgot to say that in the previous part. Now, there are many, and believe me, many different melee weapons that are incredibly good. If I miss your melee weapon, don't be mad at me. I probably just didn't have, 2 hours to mention every single possible melee weapon in the game. Of course, some great weapons, the Guandao Prime, the Glaive Prime. We have also the Inodem, but Inodem paired with Ash Prime as well, because it does incredible amounts of damage. The Praedos, we have the Reaper Prime, Namus Kyla Prime, the Legion, which is actually a good surprise, and we have the Gram Prime, the Redeemer Prime. The Paracesis is also a good weapon. The Tatsu Prime seems to be a little bit more decent than I actually thought it was. It's just I don't like the stance, but other than that, we also do have the Verdalac with its toxic lashes and doing incredible amounts of damage as well. We do have the Shield and Blade. I forgot what it's called. Let me just remember. It's the Tenant one, the Tenant Agendas. I actually really love using that weapon. Maybe a weird pick, but I love using it. Other than that, as I said, many more great weapons, but these are just the ones that I primarily use, that I love using, that I think are great. Of course, as I said, Zaws are quite incredible by their own standard, and of course there's many, many more different weapons that are incredibly good in Warframe, but these are just the weapons that I, came to the top of my head and that I think are very useful and I use on the daily basis. So, moving on to, of course, the number 1 spot. And at number 1, we have the Shrofa Gunblade. Now, this is a Mastery Rank 10 weapon that you acquire from the Granum Void and the blueprint from the Jackal boss. Now, this weapon has the highest base damage, critical chance, and critical multiplier of all Gunblades. Now, it does primarily slash on its normal attack, the guaranteed impact on its ranged attack. The critical chance and critical multiplier are 30% and 2.4 times respectively for ranged and normal attacks as well. And the sad thing is, its low status chance of 14%. That is the only bad side of this weapon. Now, these shots themselves, because the shots are what actually counts with this weapon. Now, the shots themselves has, as I said, impact, which Shattering Impact can benefit from. They have a wide radius. If enemies are within 1 meter, you're gonna ragdoll them. They have innate punch through as well, but they have a 50% drop off after 11 meters. So try to stay somewhere in, that sort of sweet spot, not being 1 meter close to them so you kiss them in the face, and not being over 11 meters so you shoot them in darts and basically do nothing. Now, the Warframe has stayed the same, but his fourth ability has changed in Snare, because grouping of enemies is going to be devastating for them. Well, the actual shot can be benefited from Jetstream. The projectile, I guess, can be benefited from Jetstream as well. It has no boost to headshot damage, so keep that in mind. So the bad sides are the normal attack speed of basically being 1 and the low status chance. So we're going to try to mitigate that at least a little bit. The Stance Bullet Dance, I love how that rhymed, is there. We have Gladiator Might, Blood Rush, Primed Pressure Point, Killing Blow, Organ Shatter, Voltaic Strike, and Primed Fever Strike. Now, we are focusing on heavy attacks here. We have Quickening for combo stacks, which is going to be, of course, better because the more combo, the more and the bigger damage numbers. The highest damage number that I've seen unobscured, I guess, I could say, is 7.4 million damage with this weapon. This damage is going to be doing incredible damage against enemies if you prime the enemy correctly. And actually, you don't even have to prime the enemy, I forgot, because you do not have condition overload. If you just basically line up a good shot on the enemy without anything obscuring it, you're going to one-shot it. You're going to devastate it. This weapon is actually really good against the Prophet Taker fight as well. Quickening is a very good mod because, of course, the initial combo and giving you 40% attack speed. Now, you can use maybe another mod that gives you initial combo or gives you combo stacks faster, but honestly I prefer Quickening just because of the attack speed, because it increases a stat that is very low on this weapon. So the main point of this weapon is grouping enemies up and then just basically blasting away with the heavy attack. Try to gain combo as much as you possibly can. Of course, Nermon, as I said in the beginning of the video, is going to be amazing because it doesn't decay all out, it just decays by 5, which is very, very good. That is, of course, going to be very beneficial, especially with Quickening, increasing that combo count even more and you doing even bigger and bigger damage numbers. This weapon can, as I said, do incredible amounts of damage. I think the average damage that I've seen this weapon do is around 2 million, just, like it's hello or good morning. Basically, 2 million damage is like that for this weapon. It is an incredible weapon and that must pick up in my opinion. But of course, the Redeemer Prime is also a good mention, as it was in the honorable mentions. Now, this has been it. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed my top 5 melee weapons in Warframe in 2022. If you guys did, do consider leaving a like, a comment, and do subscribe. This video took me a little bit of a while to create, so that would be greatly, greatly appreciated by me, your lovely host, the Gaming Weasel. I love all of you guys to bits, and I will see you guys on the next one. The Gaming Weasel, over and out.